The sky was still a bruise of deep indigo when Zoe stepped out of the back of the sound truck, tool belt snug around her hips, and a steaming travel mug of coffee warming her hands. Behind her, Jamal guided a bobbing stack of steel trusses across the dew-slick asphalt, and Marisol adjusted her headset as she checked the rigging plans on her tablet. They had arrived before dawn, as they did every festival morning, ready to spend the next 12 hours hoisting lights, running cable, and coaxing a bare patch of dirt into a soaring concert stage. By 7 o'clock, the fairgrounds were alive with the clatter of forklifts, the hiss of pneumatic drills, and the distant thunk of wooden crates being opened. Crews in high-vis vests darted like ants beneath the towering scaffolds, and trucks bearing crates labeled main stage and soundboard were cordoned off behind temporary fencing. Despite the organized chaos, Zoe felt a familiar thrill. This was home, this was purpose, this was where she belonged. They made their way toward the festival's VIP entrance, a sleek black gate draped in crimson rope and flanked by polished chrome posts. Zoe cocked her head, curious to see whether the promoter had honored their arrangement. Late the night before, Damon Carlyle himself had handed each of them a special laminated pass, stamped with his signature and embossed with the words Artist and Crew VIP Access, promising expedited entry to the promoter's tent for breakfast and show. Briefing. It was a small gesture, but to Zoe it felt like appreciation for the long hours she and her colleagues invested before anyone else was even awake. Jamal went first, presenting his pass to the young woman stationed at the gate. She wore a sharp black blazer and a look of practiced disinterest. Her name tag read Elise. She scanned the pass through her handheld reader, eyes flicking from the holographic seal to Jamal's weary face. Then she tapped at her tablet. "I'm sorry," she said, voice flat, "but these passes aren't valid for entry this morning. Promoter's orders. No VIP access before gates open to the public." She slid the passes back across the red velvet rope as though they were dirty laundry rather than promises of recognition. Zoe stepped forward, coffee trembling in her grip. "Elise, we're part of the overnight crew," she said, voice low but firm. "We helped build this stage. Damon gave us these passes himself." The assistant's lips pressed into a straight line. "I know who you are," she replied, tapping her tablet again. "But corporate policy is clear. VIP status doesn't apply to vendor staff. No exceptions." Behind them, rumor of the refusal spread in a ripple through the staging crews. A group of production assistants paused in their route, uniforms spotless, watching with mounting incredulity. Elsewhere, the first tourists arrived and whisked past the trio without a glance. Band shirts, glowing wristbands, eyes aglow with the promise of music. The crew members exchanged stunned looks. This was their world, their labor of love, yet they were being treated like undeserving strangers. Zoe's cheeks burned with indignation. She thought of the thousands of steps she had climbed across catwalks, the late-night hours spent tightening every bolt, the careful calibration of microphones and monitors so a single note would not fail. Here, at the very threshold of the promoter's tent, where their breakfast awaited, where the day's plan would be laid out, they were blocked. Marisol pressed her earbud closer to her lips, as though she might catch a whispered exception. None came. A hollow ache settled in Zoe's chest as she watched the assistant turn away, signaling the next VIP guest through the gate. The velvet rope lifted, and a cluster of suited sponsors passed, chatting about sound systems and headliner fees. Inside, glinting chrome tables and catering trays awaited them. Outside, Zoe, Jamal, and Marisol were left to clutch their passes like insult-scarred badges. With a tight nod to each other, they stepped back from the gate and returned to the outskirts of the festival grounds. As they rejoined the staging area, the temperature of the morning air seemed to rise, matching the heat of their frustration. Though they could see the stage cranes and the lighting gantries that bore their names in every beam and bracket, they were strangers to the celebration of sound and spectacle now unfolding just yards away. The laughter and clinking of fine china babbled through the concert grounds floodlights, a harsh reminder of what they had lost and what they were determined to reclaim. By mid-morning, the festival grounds had transformed into a whirl of bright colors and swirling activity. Concession tents in primary hues, inflatable sponsor booths gleaming under the sun, and the distant rumble of diesel generators powering the sound system on the main stage. Zoe, Jamal, and Marisol gathered beside a stack of unassembled metal barricades, their laminated VIP passes folded tightly in their pockets like broken promises. They watched as well-dressed guests drifted past the velvet rope. Models in flower crowns, influencers brandishing phone-shaped cameras, executives with engraved invitations, all treated as honored insiders, while the very people who had strung the lights and built the trusses were banished to the far reaches of the lot. Jamal slammed his coffee mug down on a wooden crate. "We can't just sit here," he growled, eyes flicking toward the VIP tent's polished canopy. "Our calls to Damon go straight to voicemail. Every assistant we talk to repeats the same line. No crew VIP before gates open." His frustration crackled in the air like live electricity. Zoe rubbed her forehead, the morning's indignity thudding against her temples. "And he gave us those passes himself," she reminded them, voice thick with disbelief. "He saw us last night, shaking his head, thanking us for the long haul. What changed between now and then?" Marisol tapped furiously on her tablet, refreshing the day's build schedule. "Everything's behind," she said, exasperated. "The main speakers still aren't secured, the lighting rig's only half hung, and the video walls are still in their crates. If we don't get inside soon, the headline acts will start sound check without monitors, without safety rails, without half of what we built. It's going to collapse into chaos." She glanced at the distant stage, where scaffolding loomed like skeletal giants. "I overheard the stage manager tell security to hold any non-VIP traffic at the gate. It's like they want us locked out." A low murmur of agreement rippled through them as they imagined the mounting disaster. Farther along the fence line, a cluster of roadies cursed under their breath, wrestling cables into position. None of them dared approach the VIP gate. Elisa's glare still burned in their minds. As the mid-morning sun climbed higher, sweat gleamed on their brows, and the crowd beyond the ropes thickened with eager fans, oblivious to the turmoil behind the scenes. Zoe's jaw set in determination. "We need information," she said. "Who gave the order? Why are they undermining us?" She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she had hoped never to use, that of Talia, the festival's logistics coordinator. Talia answered on the third ring, voice brisk. "Zoe, we need to talk," she said before Zoe could explain. Moments later, they ducked behind a row of shipping containers, away from prying ears. Talia's expression was grave as Zoe laid out the morning's fiasco. "I'm so sorry," Talia said, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Carlisle got a new directive from the head office. Something about catering exclusively to VIP sponsors and creating a premium experience. It went out last night after you'd left. We've been scrambling ever since." She sighed. They didn't realize how intertwined crew access is with daily operations. Now he's thousands of miles away on another promotion tour, and his assistant is terrified of overruling him. The revelation landed like a punch. Betrayal stung harder than the rising sun. "So it's just his arrogance?" Jamal spat, crossing his arms. "He values his precious corporate image over the people who actually get this event off the ground?" Talia nodded, eyes sad. "I know. I tried to argue, but they demanded a clear boundary between entertainment production and entertainment experience. They think the fans should never glimpse the machinery behind the magic." Silence enveloped them as the enormity of it sank in. The CEO's edict had drawn an artificial barrier between creators and consumers, turning essential labor into something unworthy of recognition. But while the policy was foolish, the solution lay in seizing control of their narrative. Zoe straightened. "We fix this. We show them that there is no show without us. We need to get access and keep building before Carlisle's headline acts arrive." Talia studied her for a moment. "I can patch you through to security's master panel tent. You'll need legitimate credentials to sneak in. But I can generate a temporary override code tied to your crew IDs. It expires in 10 minutes. She tapped away at her tablet. "Use the service entrance by the catering trucks. That door is rarely watched." Zoe exhaled, relief and adrenaline mingling. "Got it. Meet me there in 5. Back at the barricades, Zoe shared the plan. Marisol read the override code into her tablet and scanned Jamal's badge through the mobile terminal. The gate buzzed, the lock clicked, and the barrier swung open with a reluctant groan. They slipped inside, hearts pounding, as the VIP patrons continued to stream past the adjacent gate, unaware. Once through, they raced across the dew-damp grass toward the side door of the tent, where the cables snaked like black ribbons. Inside, the space was hushed except for the muted hum of generators and panicked whispers among lower-tier staff who had also been locked out. Zoe flashed her saved override code to the lone security guard standing watch. His eyebrows shot up, but he nodded, tapping the code into his handheld scanner. The flap rolled open and they tumbled into the belly of the tent, into a world where coffee urns steamed on folding tables and racks of sponsor merchandise gleamed under garish spotlights. The trio raced toward the core of the site, the back entrance to the main stage compound. Along the way, they passed baffled volunteers holding route maps, confused that the crew had bypassed every official checkpoint. Zoe's heart thudded with a mixture of triumph and lingering fury. They had reclaimed their right to be there, but the work ahead would demand every ounce of their skill, and every second they could salvage before the festival gates opened wide to the first wave of paying spectators. As they climbed the final steps to the stage platform, cables awaited their hands, lights hungrily awaited their bulbs, and the promise of music, once silenced by mismanagement, began to thrum beneath their fingertips. The real show was back in their hands, and nothing, not even misguided elitism, could stop it from rising. By midday, the festival grounds had morphed into a kaleidoscope of frantic activity. Sunscreen-scented families milled past snack stalls, while midway game operators shouted promises of plush prizes. Yet at the heart of it all, the main stage stood skeletal. Half-assembled trusses loomed overhead, spotlights dangled from chains instead of shining on eager audiences, and the massive speaker clusters remained sealed in their shipping crates. Zoe crouched beside a tangle of power cables, her fingertips brushing against frayed insulation as she tried to trace the proper wiring path. Beside her, Jamal wrestled a heavy lighting bar into position on a scissor lift, while Marisol barked instructions into her headset, coordinating with a harried sound engineer who hovered at the edge of the pit. They had forced their way in through the service entrance and sprinted across the grounds, adrenaline fueling each step. Now, as they worked in near silence, the weight of what had happened that morning pressed down on them like thunderclouds. The very fans they'd invited to enjoy the show were still filtered at the VIP gate, unaware that the stage itself, its lights, its speakers, its very existence, depended on the people they had locked out. Every bolt Zoe tightened, every cable Jamal clipped into place, carried the unspoken message: without this crew, there would be no spectacle. From the VIP tent, muffled words floated over the chain-link fence. Laughter, champagne corks popping, the rustle of silk gowns brushing against polished vinyl flooring. Inside that tent, Damon Carlisle and his sponsors admired promotional videos of past sold-out crowds, oblivious to the chaos growing in the open air just yards away. Jamal pressed his palm to the mast of a lighting stand, steadying the bar as Marisol aligned its tilt. The morning's indignity still burned behind his eyes. How could the promoter value his guests over his own workforce? Yet there was no time for anger now. A headliner would be on stage in less than 2 hours, and the system had to function flawlessly. A sudden crackle in Marisol's earpiece snapped them back to the moment. Clear channel for soundcheck in 10. The word sent a shock of urgency through the trio. They exchanged rapid glances, each catching the gleam of determination in another's eyes. The build must go on. Zoe sprinted to the nearest cable box, yanked what she needed, and sprinted back, her boots thudding against the plywood stage deck. Jamal and Marisol moved in perfect tandem, hoisting speakers into place with the practiced ease of seasoned pros. Each placement, each connection, erased a fraction of the morning's shame. As the festival grounds filled with the first trickle of general admission ticket holders, the stage transformed before their eyes. Rows of lights aligned like watchful sentinels. The drum riser rose smoothly, and a freshly painted backdrop unfurled to reveal the festival's name in bold, block letters. Zoe wiped sweat from her brow and surveyed the scene. In a matter of minutes, the skeletal frame would become a living, breathing stage. With 5 minutes to spare, the system powered up. Microphones hissed into life, the bass subs throbbed with an anticipatory pulse, and the LED panels glowed with color. Zoe leaned back against a support beam and allowed herself a moment to absorb the triumphant hum of machinery finally coming together. The festival's lifeblood, sound, light, motion, coursed through the cables under her hands. She thought of the fans still filtered outside, waiting for permission to cross a velvet rope that should never have kept them from the magic of creation. Behind her, Marisol tapped her mic. Sound check clear. Jamal grinned and lowered the lighting bar into its final bracket. The stage was ready. As the road crew filed off to gather their tools, they paused to admire what they had built, and to remember why they had done it, not for VIP perks or catered breakfasts, but for the roar of the crowd, the pulse of the beat, and the knowledge that, without them, the show simply could not go on. And in that hum of readiness, they found their own vindication. By mid-afternoon, the main thoroughfare of the festival grounds had filled with sunburnt fans in tie-dye shirts and glittering wristbands. their chants for the headliner rippling through the air. Behind the towering scaffolding of the main stage, the hush of cable spools and wrench-turned bolts was suddenly broken by the whine of a golf cart, bearing the promoter himself. Damon Carlyle stepped down onto the gravel, sleeves rolled up, his face pale with the weight of panic. He strode toward the trio, Zoe perched on a coiled bundle of speaker cable, Jamal straightening a lighting rig, Marisol checking a microphone stand, his voice cracking as he called their names. They looked up, surprise rippling across their sweat-brushed faces. For a moment, the bustle of the festival faded away, and only the three of them and their boss remained on the dusty service path. Zoe dropped her wrench and met his stormy gaze. Carlyle's jaw worked as he fought for composure. I owe you all an apology, he began, voice thick. I've spent hours running around trying to replace crew I kicked out this morning, and I realize now why nothing was getting done. Jamal's stance was rigid, arms folded across his chest. We got locked out, he said flatly. You barred us from the VIP tent as if we were casual fans. His tone held the hurt of 1,000 unanswered calls and frustrated messages. Carlyle ran a hand through his hair, the afternoon sun glinting on his forehead. I made a terrible mistake, he admitted. I signed off on that exclusive policy without thinking through the consequences. I valued the flash of VIP appearances over the very people who make this festival possible. You three should never have been turned away. Marisol stepped forward, the headset sliding to her shoulder. We arrived ready to do our jobs, she said quietly. We carried those passes because we'd earned your trust. Instead, we were treated like yesterday's trash. She paused, eyes glistening. That hurt more than any physical strain. Silence stretched between them. The roar of the crowd a distant thunder. Carlyle's head dipped. I know, he whispered. He reached into his pocket and produced 3 fresh VIP-style passes, glossy, embossed, and valid for the entire site. These are yours, not just today, but for every day of this festival. No one will question you at any gate. He met each of their eyes in turn. And I want to make this right in front of everyone. Before Zoe could speak, he lifted his voice so that passing crew and curious bystanders turned. Ladies and gentlemen, he called, sweeping an arm toward the main stage. Before the next act begins, please join me in thanking the backbone of this festival, our overnight setup crew. At his nod, a cluster of techs flicked on the stage's house lights, and a quiet murmur rippled through the audience as thousands of fans registered the announcement. A cheer began low, then swelled into a roar when Carlyle pointed toward Zoe, Jamal, and Marisol standing together under the scaffolding. Their tool belts sparkled with added respect in the flood of public praise. Zoe swallowed hard, her chest tight with both embarrassment and relief. She exchanged a glance with Jamal and Marisol, each of them feeling the sudden hush of forgiveness in the late-day sun. Carlyle stepped off the path and offered each of them a firm handshake. Thank you for everything you do, he said. I promise you'll never be locked out again. As the next act launched into a thunderous opening riff, the trio returned to their stations, VIP passes proudly visible on their lanyards. The stage lights blazed to life. The speakers vibrated with bass, and beneath the kaleidoscope of color and sound, they worked with renewed energy. Every handhold, every cable splice, every bolt tightened beneath their fingertips carried the unspoken truth. The real magic of the festival belongs to those who build it. And tonight, their place at the heart of the show was finally and publicly secured. By nightfall, the festival grounds had taken on a magical glow. LED floodlights pulsed in time with the music, creating ribbons of color that arced across the sky, and torches flickered atop the food stalls, casting warm pools of amber light onto the faces of smiling concertgoers. The air buzzed with excitement, sweat, and the faint scent of popcorn and grilled sausages. On the main stage, the headline act, an electrifying rock band, ripped into its final encore, guitars wailing and drum kits thunderous as the crowd surged forward in a sea of raised arms and swaying bodies. Behind the scenes, Zoe, Jamal, and Marisol stood at the edge of the stage, tool belts swapped for plain jeans and t-shirts, VIP lanyards glinting under the stage lights. They watched the audience's ecstatic dance, knowing that every note, every lighting cue, and every thunderous bass drop had been made possible by their hands. In the distance, Damon Carlyle stood beside them, no longer the aloof promoter they'd first encountered, but a humbled leader who had learned the cost of overlooking the people who built his dreams. As the band launched into its closing anthem, Carlyle raised his voice over the roar. Ladies and gentlemen, he shouted into his headset, let's give one more round of applause for the crew who built this stage from scratch. A fresh wave of cheering swept across the crowd as stagehands and roadies, formerly invisible, stepped into the glow of the front lights. Row after row, they took their bows, faces flushed with pride, as fans saluted them with whistles and claps. Zoe felt a surge of emotion. She remembered the early morning lockout, the sting of feeling unworthy, and the resolve that had carried her and her friends back into the tent. Now, in the heat of the encore, every hardship of the day felt worth it. She turned to Jamal, who gave her a grateful nod, and Marisol, whose eyes shone with happy tears. When the final chord reverberated and the crowd erupted into one last hurrah, Carlyle slipped an arm around each of them in turn. Thank you, he murmured, his voice thick. You saved this festival. They walked off the stage together, the noise of the crowd fading as they made their way down the side ramp. Back in the dimly lit production tent, the trio reclaimed their tool belts and headed for the exit gate, where Elise stood with a new look of respect. She scanned their passes without a word, then lifted the barrier and offered a small, genuine smile. It was the simplest acknowledgement, but it spoke volumes. The barrier that had once divided them was gone. Outside, the festival grounds sparkled under strings of fairy lights. Fans lingered at the food trucks, dancing in impromptu circles as the after-party DJ spun chilled-out grooves. Zoe, Jamal, and Marisol paused at the edge of the grounds, toes brushing the grass. The week's labor had culminated in this moment of collective joy, and they let themselves bask in it, the festival's pulse echoing in their veins. Carlyle joined them, holding 3 bottles of water. He handed one to each, nodding toward the emptying stage. I'm going to make sure never to forget this day, he said. From now on, VIPs are welcome, but they'll never come before the crew again. He offered his final apology in the soft hum of the cooling generators. Thank you for your patience, for your dedication, and for reminding me what really matters. As they shared quiet laughter and watched the last dancers drift away, Zoe realized that respect could be as vital as any piece of equipment. A festival without arenas or amps still might survive, but a festival without trust and recognition for its builders would collapse into silence. Together, they walked back through the gate, no longer locked out but fully part of the celebration, knowing they had claimed their rightful place at the heart of the show.